I really think that right now is a crucial time to be talking about social difference and the future of social difference. And by social difference, I mean the kinds of categories by which we define ourselves and by which we define others. And right now, I think around the world, we're seeing the tension between a diversification of society. These categories are changing rapidly. We have demographic change. Societies are aging, and migration is changing the demographic makeup of societies. And at the same time, we also have the rise of a kind of politics and a discourse which is pushing back against social difference, which doesn't like the fact of diversification. And this tension is something's happening in societies all around the world. So it's a crucial time, I think, to bring together some of the leading scholars from around the world to talk about these dynamics of what's happening now, and particularly what are the different directions this might be leading us into the future.
So welcome to the first full day of the Future of Difference. What we're going to do today is get to deeper questions about difference. This isn't a conventional academic conference. Today is designed as a structure to get to some more interesting questions, or just interesting questions that you individually and collectively want to spend time on. So it's going to be a fairly inductive process, fairly bottom up. So Steve, the floor is yours.
Right, great. I'm already ecstatic being here, seeing all of you. I mean, it's like mission accomplished already. Just seeing great colleagues, great friends, that's just wonderful in itself. Right now is a really global critical juncture around issues of migration, diversity, difference of many kinds. There's stuff going on right now in forward directions and very much in backward directions and sideways directions. And it's, as I say, it's a crucial time to have this kind of gathering, I think, especially with this kind of knowledge and experience brought together. And again, we're not going to solve anything here, but hopefully we will produce understandings, insights, concerns, experiences, findings that we know that will help contribute to figuring out where we are now, how we got here, and particularly where we're going, and possibly what interventions might be made to bring about one kind of future or another. Because for me, first of all, the diversity thing, as an anthropologist and social scientist, is about context, is about complex, heterogeneous contexts or social conditions comprised of many kinds of intersectional differences leading up to the superdiversity thing that I talked about. That's diversity thing for me. But that overlaps with the sense that a lot of researchers do, and that's actually attitudes about diversity, attitudes about race, about migration, about sexuality, etc., about gender. And those kind of get mashed into both academic and public speak. And then, especially to complicate things, we've got diversity as that normative project by governments, by companies, by universities, workplaces, schools, to try to shape a social context and to try to shape attitudes about difference. And at least in my head and in my work, I try to figure out at what point, when a change to social structure or economic structure happens, when and how is that reflected in the way particular groups are talked about? When does that have an effect on actual everyday social interactions? For instance, how do we figure out what's going on here? That, this is fairly recent data, Pew Global stuff, 2020, about rising acceptance of gays and lesbians in countries around the world. So something's going on, but something's happening in each one of these places. And is it that gays and lesbians, that their social position has changed and therefore attitudes have changed? Is it because their representations in the media or in the arts or literature or something has changed and that has changed people's attitudes? Is it the fact that around the world many more people in their workplaces, in their social networks, just know many more gay, lesbian, queer people and so forth, and so that's brought these changes? We don't know, but this is what I'm suggesting. This is the kind of patterning exercises. What what has affected and brought about these kinds of changes? And that's the kind of questions I'm asking about changes to difference. I would just say, you know, if I kind of urge you to think one thing across all these things, it's let's keep inequality in mind, because inequality is so inherently related to social difference, whether we're talking about general or discrete categories of social difference. When we're trying to figure out anything that's happening in the world, socially, politically, or whatever, we should take complexity as a starting point. We should be looking for complexity. We should be seeing how systems interact with other systems, how small changes here make big effects over here. All the things we learn from complexity science, we should be just seeing the world like that, especially as trained social scientists. So we're going to have these 5 impulse talks. I take the term out of the German Impulsvortrag, and it's this idea of just a very short intervention to get some things on the table. Okay, some ideas on the table that we might want to talk about. Okay, hand it back over.
We are now at the moment in the world where we have the most young people that we will probably ever have globally. What that means is youth is going to become a scarce resource. If you take the world and divide it in 2, and you just have Africa and everywhere else in the world between now and the end of this century will lose 200 million people. At the same time, over the next 75 years, Africa will grow by 2.3 billion people, and it will become 40% of the global population. Secondly, I'll talk a little bit about where Canada fits in all of this. Canada has one of the lowest fertilities of any country. It's down in the bottom 5th globally, far lower fertility than Germany, for example. And what that means is, in Canada, for the last 10 years, 100% of labor force growth has been due to immigration and temporary migration. Everything about the addition to the Canadian economy has been based on immigration. So we got all kinds of things to talk about on that particular dimension too, and I'm now walking off the stage. Okay.
I also want to talk to you about the need to connect these questions of difference to emotions in politics, because at the end of the day, it's about politics, and it's about resentment, it's also about recognition. People's need to feel that their dignity is acknowledged and respected, even in a context where they feel that they are deprived of resources and where their future seems to be really deteriorating. And I read the literature on how people gain hope, and I learned that it's largely through narratives. Narratives give us the tools we need to imagine the future differently. But we also need to connect, this analysis of discourse to a good understanding of the transformation of the public sphere. Because the public sphere we live in now is also becoming a digital public sphere. It has become a digital. So the traditional patterns through which we study the public sphere is largely obsolete. Habermas doesn't work anymore. And since my time is up, thank you.
In recent years, there's been growing attention to racially mixed unions and multiracial people as they become much more common across many societies. Many mixed people have white ancestry, and their existence challenges binaries such as majority, minority. Racial and ethnic mixture has been a dominant focus of research thus far, but studies also of religious mixing, for instance, Christian, Muslim, have also grown. How should we capture mixed people via categories across increasingly diverse societies? Racial membership and identifications are more and more contested and unsettled. As Rogers Brubaker has argued, claims to racial membership are less given and they're more debated. Okay, you can have, let's say, 3 different multiracial mixed people choose the exact same categories on a census, and they could have entirely different lived experiences. They could have different racial appearance, they could have different cultural and racial exposures, very, very different upbringings, very different societal treatment. Like other scholars, I would argue against facile views of mixing as evidence of a straightforward diminishing of racial barriers or of mixing as indicative of post-racial societies and sensibilities. Thank you.
The only point I want you to take away is that intersectional hauntological processes are absolutely central to devising hopeful futures. We already know that to have a holistic understanding of how to imagine diversity futures, there are a number of things that we've already encountered. Temporality, really important, and we had the entangled time tree, which I rather like, as well as in Steve's paper in Ethnic and Racial Studies, he says historically produced arrangements of social hierarchy. They matter. Difference matters. That within any category we're talking about, whether it's mixedness or anything else, we have to think about differences within it. And that there is a nostalgia for lost futures. Now, the future, as much as the past, are always changing as we live the present. You know, the way in which people can reimagine the future. Here, Jen Reid, a black woman, leapt up on the plinth where Edward Colston had been in Bristol and raised her arm. Somebody very quickly did a sculpture that they put up. And of course, both Jen Reid got down and the sculpture was taken down fairly quickly. But actually, it tells us something about how suddenly people can reimagine different things. Thank you.
So to draw examples from Singapore, Singapore's history is an example of 150 years of British colonialism, and Singapore was governed from a distance as a plural society where different immigrant groups met only in the marketplace, but were assigned a specific place in the colonial hierarchy of race. So this kind of utopian vision, of course, came to an end and ended in utter chaos with World War II and with independence in 1965. In that sense, long after colonialism's retreat, race and racialized categories continue to haunt, to use the words, identity, consciousness, and mythology. And for Singapore, imagining diversity futures will have to contend with this of how the race template is going to be, in a sense, managed and reproduced, and what happens when this template is unscrambled, for example, when new immigrants and mixed marriages, to go back to the earlier talks. So thank you very much for listening.
We really want to have a special event, and obviously a special place, bring together these world-leading scholars, but we didn't want to have a very conventional academic event. We wanted to have something where we're, as it were, thinking out of the box and being able to co-produce insights and knowledge together. And therefore we used the services of a futurist consultancy called the School of International Futures, who led us through various tools and exercises together in different groups, in different gatherings, to think about things like how narratives are generated, how categories are changing, what influences those, what is the impact of geopolitics or climate change on local dynamics of difference and diversity. And we had many breakthrough thoughts, and I think one of the most important things was that all these individual scholars, as it were, got out of their silos and really talked and worked together and questioned each other, and together really fashioned something new.
During the day-to-day, we've done different sorts of conversations. We've done things like building a timeline. We've also sent people out on a listening walk where you basically have to listen for 7 minutes in terms of processing things which are going on, and then you talk for 7 minutes and the other person listens. And I mean, actually people should do it more often. It's a really hard thing to do, you know, we're really not used to talking for that long. You actually get through a lot of thinking if you don't get interrupted, get a bit deeper under the skin of what's going on.
These exercises that the consultants put us through was a lot like going back to school. And what surprised me most was everyone was absolutely on board and enthusiastic and grabbed the opportunity with both hands and played along, and we came up with great breakthroughs, I think, because of that.
Good morning, everyone. Seats, please.
Welcome back. What we're going to do is we're going to have a system later on when we're back in this room together.
In the last bit of discussions that we were having just now, both in visiting other groups and in thinking about our own group, I was in the narrative group. One of the things that is absolutely crucial and that came up again and again is that we need to think about how we collaborate. And my view, and one we discussed a bit, is that in terms of collaborations, we don't need coalitions. We don't need to think about long-lasting collaborations. We need to think intersectionally, and we need to therefore think about shifting alliances and the ways in which shifting alliances mean that we can ally with different people at different times without offending or upsetting anyone, because we know that we're allying for something positive at a particular moment.
Each person invited was really a top person in their field of study, but I could see by the end of it how their specialty had also been shaped by their discussions and all of this group work and exercises that we went to. And I think this is quite evident in some of the statements that they were making towards the end. I could see how their thought had changed over the course of just 2 days.
For me, the most important thing to bear in mind when imagining the future of social difference is the responsibility for future generations. That comes from my work on climate change and environmental degradation.
Difference is not a natural or static category, but it is a dynamic and constructed and historically political process.
When we begin to talk about imagining diversity futures, we're not going to have one avenue of change, that we're likely to have many different debates and struggles over this issue.
The current irony is that populist regimes in many countries, including my own, are also concerned that the fertility rate's too low and is trying to get people to make babies. But they don't want other people's babies.
And so from a pluralist point of view, if we accept all points of view, we should also be able to accept people who don't agree with us about pluralism.
I use the expression utopian realism. It's not my own. There's a whole history of people trying to marry these seemingly contradictory words.
Would it not be maybe interesting to have a world in which skin color doesn't play a role, or doesn't play that role that it plays today?
We need to look through two lenses at the same time.
The future of migration, of diversity, diversification, is no longer really Europe, United States, North America. It's Africa, it's Asia, it's parts of Latin America.
I mean, we need to move away from the Western knowledge practice and policies that become the yardstick for measuring success in non-Western countries.
I think then we need to move beyond the centering of North American and European cities and to think about provincializing the West.
So that social media, for me, provides both dystopic and utopic options.
One of the most important things to keep in mind, I think, particularly in the current moment, is the impact of politics.
People discuss this idea of black swan events, events that are big, transformative, but you don't see coming. But after they happen, you think, oh yeah, that had to happen. Well, now we understand. That's why the world changed the way it did.
So I think imagining the future and thinking about the significance of social difference in the future has to do with looking back to our own history, our own past.
What we've seen happen in the past is something that can help us understand the future and is probably going to be repeated in the future.
We have an obsession with simplifying these social differences around one category: migrants, non-migrants, them, us, them.
The future is the product of decisions that haven't yet been made.
There's nothing more valuable than to have the free exchange of ideas in a way that is really liberating and also really productive. An example of this, I suppose.
We focused a lot on the role of narratives and stories in the public sphere, the way that various kinds of social difference are talked about and manipulated sometimes, or turned into narratives of social movements. Another key talking point as we look at social difference in the future was simply the role of Africa. We talked about the various futures in which people might actually be depending on labor and the youth of Africa to be the engine of world society and economy in the future. And finally, one of the key points for the academics was the importance of co-production and moving away from a kind of global north-centric perspective on what social difference is. We need to bring in much more African, Asian, and Latin American views of social difference across sexuality, race, age, and all of those categories that we're dealing with. We need to co-produce our understanding as academics with scholars from the Global South as well.
Coming here for this event has been fantastic. It's been a great opportunity really to talk to people that were coming from all over the world around the meaning of diversity and the future of diversity thinking. And we can learn from each other's experience over time, also with an understanding which we are not infallible, but we can try to think about together about the future we like.
Two futures walk into a border. One speaks of flow, managed, measured, held by the hands of those willing to share sovereignty for something bigger than themselves. The other, a future of fire, uncoordinated, rejected, migration as a threat, a wound, a weapon. Climate doesn't ask for your opinion. Geopolitics doesn't read your white paper. The global north has choices, depth or decline. But demographics is not a destiny. People don't move because of numbers. They move because of stories, of shocks, of needs unmet. And yet, story was mostly structural. Tech, economy, state, but not encounters. Not the soft, loud mess of one person facing another.